Imagine spending hours alone orbiting the moon, cut off from all communication with Earth, with only the silent void of space around you. Michael Collins, the often overlooked hero of Apollo 11, did just that. But what if in those moments of isolation, he saw something that would leave him haunted for decades before his death? Michael finally broke his silence and revealed the truth that NASA never wanted us to hear. So let's get this story going. Michael Collins is best known for his role as the command module pilot, or the third astronaut, on the Apollo 11 mission. However, when you hear what this very man finally admitted happened during the trip to the moon, you will realize that you didn't even begin to appreciate him enough in the first place. But before we get to that, you should know that his life before this iconic moment in history was just as fascinating and important. Before the Apollo 11 mission, Michael had a rich and varied career, marked by his deep passion for aviation, his dedication to the military, and his early experiences as an astronaut. Michael was born on October 31, 1930, in Rome, Italy. His father, James Lon Collins, was a U.S. Army Major General, and his family had a strong military tradition. This upbringing had a significant impact on Michael, infusing him with values of duty, discipline, and service to his country from an early age. The Collins family moved frequently due to his father's military assignments, living in various locations around the world, including the United States, Puerto Rico, and Rome. Growing up in a military family, young Michael was exposed to the world of aviation early on. His fascination with flying was sparked by the achievements of aviators like Charles Lindbergh, whose solo transatlantic flight captured the imagination of many young boys at the time. Additionally, his uncle, General J. Lorton Collins, who served in World War II, shared stories of military aviation that further fueled Michael's interest in flying. Lorton's journey toward becoming an astronaut began with his education. He attended St. Albans School in Washington, D.C., where he was known for his academic achievements and his interest in science. However, his true passion lay in aviation, and he was determined to pursue a career as a pilot. After high school, Michael followed in his father's footsteps by enrolling at the United States Military Academy at West Point. He graduated in 1952 with a degree in military science, ranking 66th in his class. West Point was a rigorous and demanding environment, but it helped shape his character and prepared him for the challenges he would later face as a test pilot and astronaut. Despite his success at West Point, Michael's primary goal was to become a pilot. Upon graduation, he chose to join the United States Air Force, a decision influenced by his desire to fly the most advanced aircraft and be at the forefront of aviation technology. Michael began his flight training at Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi, where he quickly distinguished himself as a skilled and capable pilot. He earned his wings in 1953 and was assigned to the 21st Fighter Bomber Wing at George Air Force Base in California. There, he flew the F-86 Sabre, a cutting-edge fighter jet that was instrumental in the Korean War. Flying the F-86 was a thrilling experience for Michael, and he relished the opportunity to test the limits of the aircraft. However, his early military career was not without its challenges. The risks of flying high-performance jets were ever present, and Michael lost several friends and colleagues in training accidents, reinforcing his commitment to safety and precision in his flying. His dedication to his craft and ability to remain calm under pressure earned him respect both among his peers and superiors. He continued to advance in his career, taking on increasingly complex and demanding assignments, schools, and programs. In 1960, Michael Collins reached a key point in his career when he was selected to attend the U.S. Air Force Experimental Flight Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Edwards was the epicenter of aviation innovation, where the latest and most advanced aircraft were put through rigorous testing. The school trained pilots to push the boundaries of aviation, both in terms of technology and human capability. At Edwards, Michael flew a variety of experimental aircraft, including the rocket-powered X-15, which could reach the edge of space, was used for testing. The X-15 program was one of the most ambitious and dangerous projects at the time, involving speeds and altitudes far beyond what most pilots had ever experienced. Michael's work as a test pilot required not only exceptional flying skills but also an analytical mind and the ability to make split-second decisions in high-pressure situations. His time at Edwards was undoubtedly formative, solidifying his reputation as a top-notch pilot with a keen interest in spaceflight. But it was also at Edwards that Michael began to consider the possibility of becoming a NASA astronaut. The early 1960s were a period of intense competition between the United States and the Soviet Union in the space race. Following Yuri Gagarin's historic flight as the first human in space, NASA was eager to catch up and surpass Soviet achievements. The prospect of space exploration was immensely appealing to Michael, who saw it as the next great frontier in aviation. So, in 1962, he applied to join NASA's astronaut corps. However, the pilot was not selected in his first attempt. Despite this setback, he remained undeterred. Michael knew that the selection process was highly competitive, with many of the best pilots in the country vying for a spot. He resolved to improve his qualifications and try again in 1963. This time, he reapplied and was finally accepted into NASA's third group of astronauts, known as the 14. This group included future Apollo astronauts like Buzz Aldrin, Gene Cernan, and Alan Bean. Being selected as an astronaut was a significant achievement and marked the beginning of a new chapter in Michael's career. Before he became involved in the Apollo program, the now famous astronaut took part in NASA's Gemini program, which was designed to develop the skills and technologies necessary for lunar exploration. The Gemini missions were crucial for testing spacewalks, long-duration spaceflight, and spacecraft rendezvous and docking skills that, as everyone admitted, would be essential for the Apollo missions. Michael was selected as the pilot for Gemini 10, which launched on July 18, 1966. The mission was a critical step in the United States' journey to the Moon, and he played a key role in its success. During the mission, Michael became the first person to perform 2 spacewalks during a single mission, a physically demanding and mentally challenging task that required him to maneuver outside the spacecraft while tethered to the capsule. The mission was a resounding success, achieving its objectives of docking with 2 separate target vehicles and conducting scientific experiments in space. Now, Michael was well positioned for future missions. His experiences as a fighter pilot, test pilot, and astronaut had equipped him with the skills and knowledge necessary for the challenges of space exploration. After his successful involvement in the Gemini program, Michael was originally slated to fly on Apollo 8, the first mission to orbit the Moon. However, a medical issue, a herniated disc in his spine, forced him to undergo surgery in mid-1968. This setback temporarily sidelined him, and he had to be reassigned. Once he recovered, Michael was assigned to Apollo 11 as the command module pilot. This role was crucial, as it involved piloting the command module Columbia, which would remain in lunar orbit while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin descended to the Moon's surface in the lunar module. His experience and calmness made him the perfect candidate for this role. He was responsible for the command module's functionality and would be the sole astronaut aboard while his crewmates were on the Moon, making his task both technically demanding and psychologically challenging. The training for Apollo 11 was some of the most comprehensive and intense that any astronaut had ever undergone. Michael Collins, along with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, spent countless hours in simulators that replicated every aspect of the mission. These simulators were designed to mimic the conditions they would face in space, from the weightlessness of zero gravity to the precise mechanics of docking and re-entry. The training sessions were rigorous, often lasting for hours on end, as the crew practiced every possible scenario, including potential malfunctions and emergencies. The training also included learning to operate the command module systems in detail. He needed to be able to handle any situation that might arise, especially since he would be alone in the command module for significant portions of the mission. Michael's background as a test pilot was invaluable here, as he was accustomed to dealing with complex machinery and making critical decisions under pressure. In addition to the technical training, the crew also underwent physical conditioning to ensure they were in peak health. This included exercises to maintain cardiovascular fitness, muscle strength, and flexibility, all vital for coping with the physical demands of spaceflight. Michael, like the others, followed a strict diet and exercise regimen to prepare his body for the mission. One of the key aspects of the preparation for Apollo 11 was the detailed mission planning. Michael and the rest of the crew worked closely with NASA's engineers, flight directors, and mission planners to develop a detailed timeline of events. This included everything from the launch sequence to the lunar landing, moonwalks, and the return to Earth. Every minute of the mission was planned and rehearsed to minimize the risk of errors. Michael himself was deeply involved in the planning for the command module's operations. He worked with engineers to understand every aspect of the spacecraft's systems, including navigation, communication, and life support. Here, his role was to ensure that the command module remained in perfect working order while orbiting the Moon, ready to dock with the lunar module and return the crew safely to Earth. The simulations were particularly intense for Michael, who had to practice every aspect of his solo orbit around the Moon. This included rehearsing the rendezvous and docking procedures with the lunar module, which was one of the most critical phases of the mission. The simulations were designed to be as realistic as possible, often throwing unexpected challenges at the astronauts to test their ability to think on their feet and work together under pressure. In addition to the physical and technical preparations, there was also a significant focus on psychological readiness. Remember when I told you that Michael, Neil, and Buzz all underwent psychological evaluations to ensure they were mentally prepared for the stresses of space travel? For Michael, this included the challenge of being alone in the command module while his crewmates were on the lunar surface. NASA psychologists worked with Michael to help him prepare for the isolation he would experience during this time. He would be out of contact with Earth for nearly an hour during each orbit of the Moon, a situation that could be psychologically taxing. However, Michael's calm and introspective nature made him well suited to this task. He approached the isolation with a philosophical mindset, looking at it as an opportunity to reflect and focus on the mission. Of course, there were also group exercises designed to strengthen the bond between the three astronauts. Team cohesion was crucial for the success of the mission, and Michael, Neil, and Buzz developed a strong working relationship during their training. They learned to trust each other implicitly, knowing that their lives depended on their ability to work together perfectly. On top of everything, Michael spent a considerable amount of time familiarizing himself with the equipment and systems of the command module. This involved not only understanding how everything worked but also being able to troubleshoot and repair any issues that might arise during the mission. He trained extensively with the spacecraft's guidance and navigation systems, which were essential for keeping the command module on course. Another critical aspect of his preparation was learning how to handle the spacecraft's communication systems. He needed to maintain constant communication with mission control, as well as with Neil and Buzz during their time on the lunar surface. Effective communication was key to the success of the mission, and Michael practiced this aspect extensively during simulations. As the launch date approached, the crewmates entered the final phase of their preparations. This included a series of final simulations and briefings, as well as rehearsals for the launch sequence. The astronauts also spent time in quarantine to ensure they were free of any illnesses that could jeopardize the mission. In the days leading up to the launch, Michael is said to have extensively thought about the enormity of the task ahead, despite the pressures. He remained calm and focused, drawing on his years of experience as a pilot and astronaut. He understood the risks involved but was confident in the extensive preparations that had been made. But nothing could prepare him for what he was about to witness, something that he had to keep silent about all his life. The trip to the Moon, the Apollo 11 mission, began on July 16, 1969, with the launch from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The Saturn V rocket, the most powerful rocket ever built, was the vehicle that would propel the astronauts toward the Moon. As the rocket ignited, the immense force and power were almost overwhelming, even for seasoned astronauts like Michael. The vibrations and noise were so intense that communication between the astronauts was reduced to the bare essentials. Michael was strapped into the command module Columbia, situated at the top of the Saturn V. The launch sequence went according to plan, with the rocket's first, second, and third stages firing in succession to propel Apollo 11 into space. Once the third stage was completed, the astronauts were in Earth orbit, traveling at a speed of 17,500 miles per hour. From this vantage point, Michael and his crewmates could see the curvature of the Earth, a sight that filled them with awe and reinforced the significance of their mission. After orbiting the Earth for a brief period, the crew prepared for the next critical phase of the mission, the translunar injection, which involved firing the Saturn V's third-stage engine again to boost the spacecraft out of Earth orbit and set it on a course toward the Moon. This maneuver required precise timing and coordination, as any error could result in the spacecraft missing the Moon entirely. Once the engine cut off, Apollo 11 was on its way to the Moon, coasting through the vacuum of space. For the next 3 days, the trio would travel through the vast emptiness of space. During this time, Michael was responsible for monitoring the spacecraft's trajectory, ensuring that they remained on the correct path. As Apollo 11 approached the Moon, the crew prepared for the critical phase of entering lunar orbit. This required a precise burn of the spacecraft engine to slow them down and allow the Moon's gravity to capture them. The lunar orbit insertion burn was executed flawlessly, and Apollo 11 entered a stable orbit around the Moon. From this vantage point, the astronauts could see the lunar surface in great detail, with its craters and mountains casting long shadows in the low-angle sunlight. With the spacecraft in lunar orbit, the next step was for Neil and Buzz to prepare the lunar module, Eagle, for its descent to the surface. This was a tense and complex operation, as the lunar module had to be carefully separated from the command module and positioned for the landing. Once the lunar module was detached, Michael was alone in the command module, orbiting the Moon while his crewmates descended to the surface. This period was a test of his endurance and mental fortitude. He had to monitor the command module systems, maintain communication with both Earth and the lunar module, and prepare for the critical rendezvous after the landing. After Neil and Buzz completed their historic moonwalk and all the tasks they were given, they rejoined Michael in lunar orbit. The lunar module had to ascend from the Moon's surface and dock with the command module, a maneuver that required precise timing and coordination. Michael was responsible for ensuring the command module was in the correct position and ready to dock with the lunar module. The docking procedure was a tense moment, as any mistake could have left the astronauts stranded in lunar orbit. However, the operation went smoothly, and the 3 astronauts were reunited in the command module. The trip back to Earth was a more relaxed affair, as the astronauts knew the most challenging parts of the mission were behind them. Michael continued his duties, but there was also time to reflect on the mission and its significance. It is said that he looked particularly stunned. The crew spent their final days in space performing system checks, communicating with mission control, and observing the Earth as it grew larger in their viewports. Re-entry into Earth's atmosphere was the final critical phase of the mission. The command module's heat shield would have to withstand temperatures of up to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit as it plunged through the atmosphere. Michael, who was responsible for aligning the spacecraft for re-entry, ensured that the angle was precise to avoid bouncing off the atmosphere or burning up on re-entry. As the command module descended, the parachutes deployed successfully and Apollo 11 splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969. The mission was a complete success, but it seems that it was way more than that, even life after Apollo. After the Apollo 11 mission, Michael Collins returned to Earth as one of the most celebrated astronauts in history. Yet, unlike his crewmates Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, Michael did not seek the limelight. Instead, he focused on contributing to society in ways that were meaningful to him, and he carried the weight of his unique experience in space with quiet dignity. In 1970, he left NASA to pursue a career that allowed him to spend more time with his family. He was appointed as Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs but found the political environment stifling compared to the boundless excitement of space exploration. Soon after, the former astronaut became the director of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. His leadership was instrumental in the museum's opening in 1976. Under his guidance, the museum became one of the most visited museums in the world, celebrating the history of aviation and space exploration. Michael took great pride in educating the public about the significance of human flight, from the early days of aviation to the era of space travel. Later, he transitioned into a role as an aerospace consultant and wrote several books, including his autobiography Carrying the Fire. His writing showed deep intellect, introspection, and a sense of duty to share the story of space exploration with the world. Michael was known for his clear-eyed analysis and his ability to convey the awe of spaceflight while remaining grounded in reality. Despite his fame, this man somehow always preferred a private life. He spent much of his time with his wife Patricia and their 3 children. He enjoyed outdoor activities such as fishing and hiking, finding peace in nature after experiencing the vastness of space. As the years passed, Michael remained an advocate for space exploration. He believed strongly in the potential of human spaceflight to inspire and unite people across the globe. While both Neil and Buzz were often in the spotlight, Michael quietly reminded the public of the teamwork and collective effort that made Apollo 11 possible. He continued to engage with the astronaut community and NASA, occasionally speaking at events and offering his insights into the future of space exploration. He was a mentor to younger astronauts and a respected elder statesman in the aerospace community. Even as he aged, Michael's curiosity about the universe never waned. He kept up with advancements in space technology and was particularly interested in the possibility of human missions to Mars. He often spoke about the need for humanity to continue exploring, pushing the boundaries of what we know and where we can go. But the thing is that throughout his life, he was asked countless times about his experience orbiting the moon, particularly about the moments when he was out of radio contact with Earth. As the command module pilot, Michael had orbited the moon alone while Neil and Buzz descended to the lunar surface. During these orbits, he passed over both the near and far sides of the moon, becoming the first human to see the far side up close. In his later years, Michael began to allude to a mysterious experience during those orbits. Although he had always maintained that his time alone in the command module was peaceful, he started to hint that there was something more, something that he had been reluctant to share. But before his death, Apollo 11's third astronaut, Michael Collins, finally admitted it. "I'm sorry, we lied," he said with his voice heavy with the weight of decades of silence. "There is something on the far side of the moon. They told me I couldn't talk to anyone about what I saw, but there was something that none of us could have ever expected." And here's where it gets really interesting. When asked if he felt lonely, Michael simply stated that he felt anything but lonely. Unfortunately, the details of his experience remained shrouded in mystery, as he took the secret he held to his grave. Yet this cryptic statement left the world in suspense. What could it have been? A strange structure, an unknown phenomenon, perhaps something beyond our current understanding of science? Unfortunately, the only man who ever saw the dark side of the moon never publicly revealed more about what he encountered. He passed away in April 2021, leaving behind a legacy of exploration, courage, and an unanswered question that continues to intrigue and perplex. But maybe, just maybe, there is someone he confided in, someone who knows the truth about what Michael saw while up there. Whether it was a close family member, a trusted colleague, or a friend, the possibility lingers that the full story might someday come to light. What do you think happened, though? Let us know in the comments down below and subscribe to our channel for more.